Welcome back to Cox Connections, a program that provides up-to-date information on events that affect you, our customers. As the country commemorates the anniversaries of several milestones of the Civil Rights Movement, including the March on Washington, one can only wonder how far African Americans have come in 50 years. Here to talk to us about this are Reverend Deborah Hagins, Hampton University's first female chaplain, and Hampton University professor of political science and history, Professor Robert Watson. Thank you for being on the show, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Reverend Hagins, I have to start with you. Being a licensed minister myself, I'm going to start with you and the state of the Black church. Where are we today?
From my experience and what I've seen, that the Black church is active, it is listening, it is in transition, it is changing its status from the Negro church to the Black church as it was in the 1950s. But the term the Black church came about as all of the revolution and the movement and the civil rights. So I believe that the Black church is listening and it's active and it's involved in the day-to-day lives of its people. Let's
stay there, the lives of their people, and particularly when you look at the Black community today, there are a number of challenges. You just look at the newspaper.
Sure.
We have young men filling up our prisons. We have single-parent households, economic challenges. And there's some who would say that these issues are a result of what's not happening in Black families. So back to the church, what is the church doing to strengthen Black families so that we can get better outcomes in those areas?
There are many churches who have taken on the mantle of social justice and social improvement for its parishioners, for the faithful. The church is involved in many educational and tutorial and prison ministry type programs, voter reentry type programs. So I do believe that because there are no picket signs and no sit-ins and things like that, we cannot say that the Black church is not actively involved in the lives of its parishioners. I believe that the church is actively working with marriage ministries, singles ministries, there are children's churches. Many churches operate child care centers that are actually teaching children to be ready for kindergarten.
Will the church continue to be relevant in the lives of beyond, in 2014 and beyond?
Asking that is almost like asking if the gospel is still relevant. As long as there are people who are lost, as long as there are people who need the gift of salvation, as long as there is kingdom work to be done, there will be a place for the Black church.
Professor Watson, you're dealing with young folks all day long, and there are young people who will say that the civil rights movement, that's ancient history. That doesn't have anything to do with me. What do you say to that?
I say, unfortunately, I hear that all too much. And I deal with young people who don't know the history. And I try to explain to them that the civil rights movement is as relevant today as it was 50 years ago. Part of dealing with young people is trying to get them to understand that some people paid a heavy price for them to be able to do these things that they just kind of take for granted. And so it is a challenge. And people who do not know their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And this past is coming back to haunt us in terms of what we see going on today.
Well, you mentioned our past, and clearly Hampton University and other historically Black colleges and universities, they have their own unique place in our history. Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. If it were not for the HBCU, the historically Black colleges and universities, many of us would not have gotten the education, would not have been in positions of leadership. Because if you look at the Black leaders who came out of the civil rights movement, most of them came out of the HBCUs. Most of them went into organizations like the NAACP and CORE and SNCC and SCLC, but they received their education in the HBCU, the Hampton, the Norfolk States, the Tougaloo, the Talladegas, the Fisk, the Howards of the world. So they were as relevant then as they're very much relevant then, but they're just as relevant now.
You mentioned the political landscape. Let's talk about the political landscape today. What does it look like for African Americans here in Hampton Roads?
I think, unfortunately, the political landscape here in Hampton Roads has really never been pursued the way it ought to be. by African Americans, I think the opportunities are there. But you have to seize the opportunity. And I think there are some people, in fact, who have stepped up to the plate, so to speak, and who really understand that as we move forward, that it's important that they use their political wisdom to make life better for everybody.
As you spoke, you reminded me of March 7th, 1965, Bloody Sunday.
Yes.
The march, and we know the history of the march across the Selma Bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge near Selma, Alabama, and how that incident sparked President Johnson to say, this is not a Negro problem, this is not a white American problem, this is an American problem, and how that incident really led 5 months later to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which changed the political landscape of this country.
Absolutely. And that's something that young people need to be mindful of. But if you don't know your history, and if people tend to move away from teaching that history, then young people will not realize that many of the people who were involved in the civil rights movement were young people. Young people like the 4 students at North Carolina A&T, or the students down in Orangeburg, the students at Howard, the students at Tougaloo, the students at...
And Martin Luther King.
And Martin Luther King.
He was 26 years old
Absolutely.
when he made that first speech to help out that seamstress down in
Montgomery.
Down in Montgomery,
That's right.
Rosa Parks.
That's right.
So we only have a minute left. We have to talk about education quickly. What is the role of education? What do we need to be doing more of if we're going to realize Dr. King's dream and all the sacrifices that were made in the 50s and 60s on our behalf?
We have to make sure that our young people, first of all, understand the importance of education, and that all of the advances that have been made have to be made in the name of education, and education is the key to a better future. Hampton University has been very forward in its ministers' conference in training ministers and educating ministers so that they can go back and be better prepared for the parishioners. The Black Family Conference since 1978 has been a great part of Hampton University's legacy to address those issues that community leaders and pastors have in their churches.
Well, Reverend Higgins, we're going to have to give you the last word. Thank you both for what you're doing, and thank you both for keeping our history alive.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you for joining me on this episode of Cox Connections. As always, I want to thank you personally for choosing Cox Communications for your entertainment, information, and communication needs. We know you could have chosen another provider, but because you chose us, we pledge to be a friend you can trust. We promise to provide you with innovative products backed up by a talented local team of professionals that will help you stretch your dollar. And we promise to continue to make a difference here in the Hampton Roads community. From all of your friends and neighbors here at Cox, we thank you again for joining us on this edition of Cox Connections.